You're listening to Know It, Live It. I'm your host, Laura Hanson-Brexa. Each week I have an insightful conversation with a fascinating person who shares their life mission, determination, passion, principle, or spiritual journey. And today I'm talking to Alexandra Stockwell, and my audio is poor. But what I say is I am sure intelligent and enlightening, so please bear with the audio. Dr. Stockwell's is wonderful. I am delighted to have Dr. Alexandra Stockwell with me today. I met Alexandra about 10 years ago through homeschooling activities. I have been an informal student of hers, learning from her as we chatted when we took walks with our children, and a formal student in a couple of her courses. Since we are not talking of kids' basketball teams, schoolwork, or skin knees, I will be formal.
Dr. Stockwell.
Welcome to Know It, Live It. Diving right in, what led you from just thinking about doing something about what you knew to help couples have deeply nourishing relationships? You don't just talk about how to get along better. You're going for something deeper. And giving speeches, writing a book, narrating your book, holding classes, serving clients, and everything else.
You know, I've really enjoyed anticipating our conversation because I think so many people talk about the importance of setting goals and taking the steps and moving towards goals. If you want to make something happen in your life, you really need vision. And the fact is that while I have accomplished a great deal, what you've said and more, that has not been my orientation. That's not really my personality. And so a lot of the things that I've accomplished, they are the kinds of things that one might set a goal and go for it, or set a goal and think about it and eventually go for it. You know, how one moves forward is highly variable, but that's not actually how I've created my life and how I have tapped into my professional purpose and life purpose in terms of my career. I used to actually think it was a fault of mine that I wasn't that good at visioning. Like, I've been at so many workshops for entrepreneurs where it's like, what do you want? Imagine how you want your business to be in 3 months, in 3 years, in 15 years, at the time of my death. And so I'm very familiar with all of those questions. And if I had answered those questions with gusto, then I would answer your question about how I took action very differently than I actually am going to answer it. Because I'm actually much better at being in the present moment than I am at envisioning a grand future or a big impact. That feels kind of far away. And since we have the privilege of a meandering conversation today, I'll add that growing up, I was in a community, and this includes my parents and step-parents, who prided themselves on the ways that they had changed in their life. And I didn't really think, especially my father, that he had actually changed in any ways that were significant in terms of the impact on me. So I became a little skeptical about what kind of change and transformation is actually humanly possible, as opposed to the lip service to it. So I don't know if that kind of curtailed my dreams and visions about who I would be and how I would impact people. But the simple truth of my answer to your question is one step at a time, without knowing where I would end up. In fact, if you had told me when I got started that I would talk about my sex life and the sometimes intimate details and certainly vulnerable communications I have with my husband, and discuss that in my book, on my highly ranked podcast, just even with clients, I would have just thought you were crazy, because I was a very private person and I just never would have thought to share the way I do. So that's one example. So if I pull this in and give a very concise answer to you, I never actually had the experience that I had a big dream and needed to get myself off the couch. It's more that I just took the next aligned action, which was sometimes small and sometimes big, but it was because taking that action was more appealing than not taking it, without any sense that one step at a time I'd end up in Rome.
Just one step at a time.
Yes, and actually, as someone who I'm a relationship and intimacy coach, and so that includes holding space for conversations that don't tend to happen, and it also includes habit change and creating a different reality within oneself and with one's partner. And so I have put a lot of attention into how to change habits, because staying on the couch is a habit. And the most effective ways to change habits are not to wait for, I don't know, a thunderbolt of inspiration or some kind of spiritual epiphany. The way to change habits are one small step at a time. So in my particular case, I did a coach training, but at the time I didn't even know what a coach was. The only reason that I did this training was because my own marriage was loving and dehydrated. And I'm a child of divorce. My husband is a child of divorce. And I didn't take for granted that we would stay together. I knew I needed to learn the tools and the skills. At the time, I didn't even know it took skills. When I started, I thought, well, maybe it's all about picking the right person. Now I don't believe that at all. I'm clear that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And the question is, do we want to become a student? But when I started, I just wanted to discover tools, ways of being, a kind of personal happiness. And so I did a very in-depth training for lay people, and it doubled as a coach training. And as I said, at the time, I didn't even know what a coach was. But I did this because I had questions about how to be more connected in all ways with my husband and honestly with myself. And then while I was at this training, I was kind of curious because I'm a homeschool educator. I come from a family of teachers. And so I just was kind of curious, well, how do you train other people to help strangers improve their relationships? I was just curious about the pedagogical model employed. But then when I went to the teaching lab, I thought, I feel at home. This is what I want to be doing. And so the main change I made was I paid attention during the trainings in a different way, thinking, oh, how could I share this with others? And then people just started asking me to help them with their relationships. Like, I did not start by hanging out a shingle. In fact, I had done a lot of coaching just because it was fulfilling and I learned, and I was very glad to give to people. And then I remember the very first client who said, I just really feel like I should pay you for this. And I've been charging ever since. But it's not that I had a plan, unless you want to say my plan was to listen to whispers within me, to follow curiosity and intuition, seeing what inspired me, how I wanted to balance my own shortcomings, what kind of teachers I was drawn to learn from. So that is a very long answer. And the reason that I've given all of this is that for anyone who's listening who wants to live more meaningfully, wants to make things happen in the world, you definitely do not need the whole thing to be planned out. If you need a loan from a bank, then yes, you'd better come up with a business plan. But if you don't need a loan from the bank and you don't have a spouse that you need to justify every action to, then take the luxury, if this is the kind of person you are, as I am, to really take it one step at a time, because one of the things that makes possible is that you don't need to figure it all out before you've even taken any action. One of the things about the way I've done things that I've just described is I've been able to kind of course correct and adjust as new opportunities became available, as new aspects of myself were activated and engaged. And so there's no way I could have laid out the path up front. I only could lay out the commitment to authentically growing and being of service.
I guess if you lay out too much up front, you're laying it out as you're laying it out. I like that you're activating aspects as you grow, because perhaps you're not letting your plan grow. You're keeping the plan as you developed it at the beginning, and you're certainly not the same person you were when you built that plan.
Exactly. And to make this a very concrete communication, if you think of parenting a 10-year-old, you may be competent and confident, but maybe there's the rare foster parent who can do this. But in general, I, anyway, with my 4 children, needed them to be newborns and then toddlers and 3-year-olds and so on before being ready to parent 10-year-olds. I don't think I would have had it all figured out in a way that was relevant and accurate when they were newly born or newly conceived. So I think of a lot of life being that way. You can have your values clear, but the actual plans and strategies, it's best if they come as you yourself develop.
Earlier, you talked about vulnerability. One of the things that I learned in one of your classes is when you begin a conversation and you ask your spouse or tell them, I'm going to be vulnerable, or can I be vulnerable? I love that. If you want to talk about that. And I also want to ask you, why should you bother making your marriage better?
Okay, 2 very different questions. You may have to ask me the second one because I'm going to start with the first one. And the way you have the gist of it, but the way that I teach that is when you have something vulnerable to communicate, that you say some version of, I have something vulnerable to share with you. Are you available to hear it? And the are you available to hear it is actually the most important part of that communication, because I was just coaching someone earlier today where this was relevant, that if we just, let's say we have the self-awareness, the insight, and the courage to share something vulnerable, the way that an experience has impacted us, or a desire for something to improve in the marriage, when you're going to share it, most likely you've been thinking about it for some time. You've been marinating in it, looking at it from different points of view, deeply connected with what you want to say. I mean, it might just come flying out of you unplanned, but that's not a vulnerable conversation. That's something else. That's like a communication. But a vulnerable communication is going to be a little more thoughtful. But for your spouse or partner hearing it, they haven't been thinking about it the way you have. And the natural response is to get defensive and either shut down or blame and be angry, any of the forms of not being receptive and gracious. Now, some people are able to be gracious and receptive, but most likely whatever your communication is, it's going to be a little triggering to hear if it's the kind of vulnerable communication I'm talking about. So you already kind of cut through some of the defensiveness. If you say, I have something vulnerable to share, are you available to hear it? And it's a real question. This is not just some rhetorical question where if he or she says it's not a good time, that then you get to sulk and feel rejected. No, for the success of this communication, you want to both be ready. If your spouse isn't ready for the conversation, then it's already not going to go well. This is a kindness to ask, are you available to hear it? And if the answer is no, then you make a plan for another time. You know, maybe your spouse needs to have something to eat and take a shower, and then they'll be ready. Well, that conversation is going to go so much better if you wait. So that is on vulnerable sharing, which is a good segue to your kind of profound question. Why should we improve our marriages? I've been interviewed on podcasts, I don't know, probably over 400 times, and I've never been asked this question. So I want to just take a moment and think, because might have an answer at many different levels. At the most superficial level, if you want your marriage to last and you don't want to be having a marital culture of suffering, then you want to improve your marriage. Just very simply. But I think of it actually a lot more deeply than that, because it's not just about lasting and lasting without it being awful. I think of marriage as really the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. I think of it as a container for spiritual evolution. And what do I mean by that? Well, we can button up our metaphorical selves and engage with the world in all kinds of ways that are important, professional, appropriate, but don't bring our whole selves to the interaction. And as human beings, one of our primary needs, yes, it's not at the bottom with Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of food and shelter and sleep. Those are clothing, to be comfortable in terms of the temperature. Those are stronger needs. But to be expressed and fulfilled and operate optimally as a human being, we have a very deep need to be seen and heard. And as children, it's in our family where that ideally happens. And as adults, the place where that ideally happens most is in our marriage and intimate relationships. Now, there obviously are all kinds of exceptions to that. And what I'm saying is relevant if you're listening and you're a single parent or you're a single person or there are lots of variations. But in general, in the context of heteronormative marriage, the greatest opportunity, which certainly doesn't always happen, but the greatest opportunity is to feel seen and heard and loved and supported and cherished and respected by a spouse who may know you better than anyone else. And when we meet the need of feeling seen and heard, not exclusively with our spouse, but in some very unique ways with our spouse, well, that is bonding and delightful and ideally contributes to erotic vitality and connection and makes the marriage an oasis from the challenges of life. And also, it fuels the rest of our lives. Like, if there is one thing that when you change it, it really changes the colors and contours of the rest of life, having a great marriage is definitely on that list, because the way that we interact with our children is completely enhanced when we have a beautiful, strong, mutually supportive, growth-oriented, and sexually fulfilling marriage. But so also is our professional life. Like, to come home to a nourishing, delightful place to be makes all the difference in our professional careers. And there are plenty of people who make a lot of money who have very unsatisfying marriages, but when we feel good about who we are in the context of our marriage, it is of immense benefit to pretty much every career choice there is. So, and I won't continue, but I'm really only getting started. It's very clear that having a great marriage is good for health. It's good for longevity. It's good for really any wholesome value. There's benefit to improving your marriage. And there's one more thing I want to add, which is that there's some things that once we achieve them, we're good to go. Maybe we find the home we want to live in, and there's no reason to ever look for another home until, the very end of our lives. Maybe you want to have a family, and then you have however many children you're going to have, and then you move on and look at other things. It depends on the career, whether or not that happens there as well. But in many areas of life, once we achieve something, then we get to enjoy the fruits of that achievement. Well, when it comes to marriage, that's partially true and partially not true, because if we achieve a nourishing, gratifying marriage, that is not something that we can just kind of harvest for the rest of our lives. As human beings, we continue to grow and develop physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, and all of that growth and evolution ideally is welcome and fuels our marriage. In fact, one of the main reasons that marriages become kind of stale and less fulfilling, let's say 20 years in, is because the individuals either stop growing, except in response to crisis, or one or both of them continues to grow and develop individually, but the marriage stays stuck in the iterations of who those people were before. It's a little bit similar to what we were talking about in terms of growing in a career. Like, your marriage needs to grow and evolve as each of you do, and you each need to grow and evolve in order to be the most successful humans. Some of the reasons I think it's important to put attention and intention into improving your marriage. And I didn't even get into really modeling for children. Like, this is a super dynamic holographic question, but I've wanted to express some of the things that maybe wouldn't just immediately come to mind for a listener.
Thank you. I love the answer. I love the answer. And so, as you talked about going step by step, little light maybe in front of you, stepping toward that light, and another little light and stepping toward that light, I have to assume there were obstacles along the way. And I want to know what you did when you approached an obstacle. How did you handle those?
Okay, well, let me share what I think has been my biggest obstacle, although I think I'll just go with calling it my biggest challenge.
I love the word challenged.
There are bona fide obstacles and you have to go around or back up, but this really isn't like that. So we didn't particularly talk about it yet, I think, but I'm a physician. I don't practice clinical medicine anymore because I am a full-time relationship and intimacy coach, but I was a practicing physician and I have 4 children and I have a personality where I'm really glad to help people. I'm glad to facilitate transformation. When I coach people, it brings me alive. My attention is largely on them, and I'm inspired by people and the growth and learning that is possible. I moved recently and someone happened to mention in an exchange we were having in a Facebook group that she had just had a baby the day before. And so I offered to bring her food. Like, I'm not a martyr. I used to be more martyr-like and resentful as part of that, but I have very good boundaries, but I really love doing things for people. And so that's a great quality in a coach, since my whole purpose in coaching is to facilitate transformation for other people's benefit in ways that obviously benefit me too professionally. But my motivation was never making money. It was learning to become ever more skillful and masterful in facilitating transformation. And I remember attending, was the first training that I attended for entrepreneurs. I'd already been coaching for 3 years and very gratified by it. And my goal at the time was to cover any expenses I had, which were hardly any, and to pay for my daughter's college education, because at the time I had 1 child in college and I wanted to be able to pay the bill, which I did. And I made just enough to do that. And I was happy as a clam, so to speak. But I went to this training. And first of all, even though I had a small business, a small coaching business, I absolutely did not identify as an entrepreneur, as a business person. And the trainer in the front of the room took us through this exercise identifying what a hobby is and what a business is. And I realized that the way that I was behaving was much more in line with a hobby rather than with a business. And that was very enlightening for me. And it was very confronting for me to then decide, okay, well, do I want to make it a business? Like, I just love helping people, but if I make it a business, I'm going to be able to help many more people. Anyway, the biggest challenge for me has been to become a businesswoman, to become an entrepreneur, not just in what I do, but also in my identity. So at this point, that was, let's see, because I started coaching in 2013, that was early 2016. So 9 years ago, I now absolutely identify as an entrepreneur, as a businesswoman. I have everything in order in terms of my business finances and my personal finances being separate. I do accounting, I pay taxes, and I have a profit in my business, and my rates to work with me are not low. And my focus is on continuing to grow my skills as an entrepreneur. So I haven't really kind of taken you through the drama of my identifying as a helper rather than an entrepreneur, but it has been a very profound Achilles heel that I guess it's mostly healed now. That's funny. Difference. I didn't mean the pun, but that has far and away been my biggest challenge because it has to do with a change in focus in my attention. Like, let me be specific. One of the teachings when you do a free webinar, one of the teaching is not to give all the answers or even a free consultation call. I don't do free consultation calls anymore because actually this is totally relevant. So the kind of teaching for entrepreneurs, if you're going to do a webinar or you're going to do a free consultation call, is you give people enough to perceive that I bring value, but not enough for them to feel like they've solved their whole problem because they should sign up with me to solve the problem. And actually, what I'm about to say doesn't sound like a challenge, and it wasn't a challenge for anyone except for me, that for a number of years, I had many people who would book a free consultation. People often do them for like 30 minutes, but I never felt like I could go in depth enough with 30 minutes. And so mine are often 90 minutes. And I had couple after couple meet with me for 90 minutes and then be clear, like their situation was solved. Their perspective had changed. They understood what they needed to do. Things had transformed. I think the one that was like so glaring for me was this couple who'd been married for 40 years. They live in the Midwest, and their daughter had begged them to work with me. I don't know the daughter, but I think she read my book, or I don't know exactly how she knew about me. But anyway, she begged them to work with me. And these, I don't know exactly how old they were, but they've been married for 40 years. So that puts them at least in their 60s. And neither one of them had ever worked with a therapist or coach before. And so we had this beautiful in-depth conversation about an issue that they had been disagreeing about for 2 years. And it felt fully resolved. So we met on Friday. And then we had a plan to check in on Monday, mostly because I thought then they could, digest our conversation. And on Monday, I'd see how they were doing and then make my proposal for how we might coach together. And he was crystal clear that they didn't need any more coaching. It had solved their problem. So it's kind of funny to see this as a challenge but it was very complicated for me. Like, I didn't think it's that I was so good at what I did, that I was so efficient that everyone was like better. That's not how I thought about it. It's more that I felt like I missed this fundamental skill. I suppose in simpler terms, I could say to be good at sales, but it wasn't just about sales. It was about rationing my giving. And so I haven't cracked that nut. I'm not good at meeting with a couple who's been married for 5 years, 35 years, whatever it is. And after 20 minutes, like giving them something good and stopping there. That's just like so superficial to me. So my initial calls are 90 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. I call it an intimacy roadmap session. They're super comprehensive and I charge for them. I don't do anything for free. I mean, I do lots for free in terms of my podcast, but I don't do any individual calls for free. And that is how I've navigated that challenge, because like becoming better at sales in the traditional sense just worked against who I am and who I want to be. So I don't know, like that's what comes to mind. It's been a very deep challenge to evolve my identity to consider the business elements, and yet it's necessary if I want to, well, I do. I really want to change the cultural narrative around long-term relationships so that people understand what's possible and how to create it. And that really won't work if I didn't figure out how to identify and behave as an entrepreneur, but doing it in my own creative way, like eliminating free calls rather than learning how to give a small ration of what I actually want to give people.
Well, you have to be yourself, Alexandra.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to be yourself. So when people come to you, they may not even know it's possible.
I think that is routine, because when you're married, you're in your patterns, your personal patterns and your relationship patterns. And if a couple knew how to get out of those patterns, they would get out of them. So at the point at which we're talking, they have a hope to varying degrees, but not a conviction of what's possible.
Do people usually compare what they see in media, thinking that's really what is out there?
Mostly I work with educated, successful professionals, doctors, lawyers, people, the founders in tech. people who really know how to make things happen in other areas of their life and are quite intelligent. And so their frustration is knowing how to make things happen in other areas of their life and not knowing how to make it happen in the bedroom and in communication in the relationship. And I think the place where your question is really relevant across most elements of society is pornography, where the physiological experiences are performance based and not authentic, and the emotional element is lacking. So many men conclude that that is what is normal, which is then damaging in a marriage, and women presume that too and think there's something wrong with them when they are actually totally normal. So I would say in my work that a good amount of what I do is educate in a way that normalizes people's experiences and what men's and women's bodies actually need to be more connected.
So when you have successful people, is the communication so much different between succeeding outside of the marriage and within the marriage?
Yes, there are unique challenges that pertain when one is educated and successful in the professional context. And then how is professional communication so different from marital communication? And the thing I would say that it comes up for men, but it especially comes up for women who are ambitious, driven, educated, and successful, because they are used to being a manager, being a boss, being a surgeon, and all these roles that I've just mentioned have to do with delegating and telling other people what to do. And so for a woman who has spent a lot of years training and then a lot of her awake hours managing people in order to be professionally successful, she has a way of doing that, which really works with people who are like in lower positions of authority in the professional context. And while it's not ideal, it also works with children where she needs to, tell the children to clean up their clothes and clear the dishes and whatever. Like there's a managerial style to that communication. And so, yes, for my clients, one of the recurring themes is women who treat their husbands like employees if they're entrepreneurs, or like OR techs if they're surgeons, or whatever the case may be. And so it is a different skill set to communicate with respect and equality. Not that it's particularly harder, but if it's not the thing that has brought success in your adult life, it definitely doesn't just come naturally unless you happen to have had it modeled amazingly well by your parents. And I know that I described this in terms of women, but the same thing pertains for men too, that I'm coaching a couple right now. He's a very successful entrepreneur and founder, and he's started multiple companies, and he is efficient and quick with his communication. He has an amazing capacity to listen at a meeting and identify the problem and create the solution and say, okay, you do this and you do this and you do this. And that is how he is professionally successful. Well, his wife does not appreciate being spoken to that way. She wants him to slow down and be present with her. And while she values his intelligence and his capacity to kind of zoom out and be precise with the details, she wants to feel connected. She wants to feel collaborative. And she's currently at home raising children, but she previously had a business. She knows how good that feels to tell people what to do and create success, but she does not want to be the recipient of that. So yes, I think it is a different skill set. And what I would say is that successful professional communication does not inherently translate well to successful marital communication. However, if you're able to do what one of my clients calls elite communication, elite marital communication, where you're able to not dial down your own intelligence and contribution, but really make room for the other person as well and be truly collaborative, that when you're able to do that well in marriage, you have skills that translate beautifully and successfully to be an even better communicator in the professional sphere.
So it goes the other way.
Yes.
Think about that just for a moment. The priority, which do you work on first?
Well, the thing is that at work, if you don't communicate well, you usually get feedback, either direct explicit feedback or feedback by people quitting or whatever it is. When it comes to marital feedback, I think this is one of the things that sometimes distinguishes educated, successful couples is that if they are gratified at work, they can tolerate a lot at home in the way of poor communication. So you may not get the clear feedback right away. And when it comes, it's like hard to work with because it's overlaid with years of resentment and so forth. So I know you were thinking about which one to work on first, but I, of course, work on your intimate communication. If you can give and receive feedback constructively with your spouse, if you can attune to what your experience is and then express it and have room to receive your partner's, well, you're simultaneously improving your professional communication too.
I think things go well when you leave a happy home in the morning, when you wake up happy, when you go home looking forward to going home, when you're looking forward to your spouse coming home versus dreading it.
Absolutely. And I think nowadays, meaningful, maybe this is always true, but it seems especially true right now, meaningful work requires courage, and having a good marriage provides you courage in your professional life. And if you're on eggshells when you come home or you don't look forward to coming home, that kind of undercuts the motivation to take risks and bring your A game at work.
Or when you're working at home.
Well, yes, working at home makes all of this so
Yeah.
much more intense.
Because you don't go away, you're just a bedroom door away, office
Exactly,
door
yes.
away. So when you're writing your book, Uncompromising Intimacy, tell me about the title and what that means.
Well, far and away, the most common relationship advice that is given, especially when it comes to marriages, is that you need to compromise. If you want to be happy, you have to be good at compromise. That, a certain percentage of Hallmark cards, your wedding gift cards, talk about compromise. And it's just completely wrong. If you want a pleasant, dehydrated companionship, compromise is an excellent way to get there. But if you want a kind of energizing, expansive, erotically alive, growth oriented marriage, then compromise just will never get you that. Uncompromising Intimacy is it's the name of my book. It's the name of my method. And it's about being authentic, self-aware, and self-expressed. So when I talk about uncompromising intimacy, I don't mean uncompromising in the sense that you're inflexible and rigid and you always get your own way. Not at all. But insofar as compromise is withholding what is true for you so that your spouse is more comfortable. Uncompromising intimacy is all about discovering how to share who you are, what your dreams are, what your challenges are, what your inner world is like, what you think about in the morning, just anything that you feel, well, I better not say that. Learning how to find the way to actually share it. Because when you share who you are, when you open your heart in this way, well, it is a lot more fun and a lot easier to then open your legs when you get to the bedroom. I mean, not that the motivation specifically is sex, but when you can bring all of yourself to the relationship, well, that is just the most gratifying kind of marriage to have. So uncompromising intimacy really points to the kind of intimacy that naturally builds when you let go of compromise in the way that I meant it earlier.
How you do anything is how you do everything. Can you tell me where you got that motto and how you apply it to your work?
Yes, I don't actually remember exactly where I heard it. It's one of these things that is mentioned again and again in the context of personal growth. So Tony Robbins, I actually haven't done his trainings, but anyone like that is going to be teaching that how you do anything is how you do everything. And what that really points to is that we have an identity, we have a way of being, and that shows up in all of the contexts in which we show up. So the reason that I love how you do anything is how you do everything is what that means is that wherever I put my attention to grow and improve it's going to immediately have a ripple effect and reflect the growth and improvement in any other area. So when I'm coaching, sometimes it happens right at the beginning of a session where, let's say, one spouse will say to the other, "Can you get me a glass of water?" And the other one will roll their eyes before getting it. Okay, that's a little moment that'll be so easy to ignore. Just wait till the water comes back and then we start with the real coaching session. But often I'll say, "What was that about?" And we'll unpack what was going on. And maybe it's that she behaves like a damsel in distress and he wants her to be more empowered. Like, there's usually something deeper going on than just kind of the superficial thing about getting the water. But the important point is that I think the whole way that private relationship and intimacy coaching works is not because I am joining a couple in their home and following them around with all of the interactions. In fact, many of the couples I work with, their sex lives improve and we never even talk about sex, because how you do anything is how you do everything. So if I teach them to listen with care or to set up a vulnerable conversation in a way that's going to be successful, well, when they do that, then that's going to have a ripple effect when discussing logistics, when making love, when doing retirement planning. Like, it's a wonderful thing. I think another way to summarize what I'm saying is we are holographic beings. So if I change or facilitate change in one part of the hologram, the whole thing is impacted. And I think this is extremely hopeful, because this way we don't need extensive lists of all of the ways that we need to improve. If we can see the theme that shows up in multiple arenas and we evolve in that way, well, it's actually very efficient and highly impactful. So this is how it works in terms of the actual coaching that I do. In terms of how I live by it, I guess I always have something that I am looking to evolve in myself, and I would be overwhelmed if I had a to-do list miles long. But if I'm working on something and I change how I do one thing, I love knowing that it's going to, in a positive way, improve how I do everything else as well.
Thank you for being with me here today, Dr. Stockwell. If anyone has any questions, where can they find you?
Thank you, Laura. I have loved speaking with you so much. You can find me at alexandrastockwell.com, and from there you can find links to all of my social media and my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, any courses or an application for private relationship and intimacy coaching. But the thing to do is go to alexandrastockwell.com.
Thanks for listening. Visit knowitliveit.net for the latest scoops, recaps, and more. Remember to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this podcast. Don't miss an episode with fascinating people who live what they know they should.